Wil je ook dat steeds meer mensen Jezus leren kennen? Dat willen wij ook. Het is onze passie om heel Nederland te bereiken met het evangelie. Bij Family 7 zie je geloofsopbouwende programma's. Bijbelstudies, kinderprogramma's, films. Voor iedereen is er wel wat. Wat mensen vinden? Luister zelf maar.
Family 7 is opbouwend en ontspannen tegelijk.
24/7 de blijde boodschap beleven.
Je kunt al streamen vanaf €3 per maand en dan krijg je het magazine er gratis bij. Wij zijn volledig afhankelijk van giften, dus meer ondersteunen mag natuurlijk altijd. Ben je nog geen lid of wil je nog meer mensen lid maken van onze Family 7 familie? Dan kan dat. En dat is zelfs heel eenvoudig. Bel naar 055 5790 710 voor meer informatie of stuur diegene naar family7.nl/sponsor. Zo simpel is het. Help jij mee?
In our last episode of Drive Through History, The Gospels, we explored the birth of Jesus. We examined the Gospel accounts of Jesus' humble beginnings in Bethlehem and the Hebrew prophecies heralding his arrival. Although he was viewed as some kind of king in these ancient texts, he was born to modest parents among animals in a cave-like basement and laid in a feeding trough for a crib. Things didn't really add up. Who was this child? Episode of Drive Through History, we ended with the story of some wise men from the east known as the Magi, who had made a pilgrimage of possibly over 1,000 miles to honor a baby that they said had been born King of the Jews. Now, when those Magi arrived here in Judea and told King Herod who they were looking for, well, that news sent Herod over the edge, which would not be surprising or out of character given what we know with certainty about King Herod. Herod has a very well-documented history of paranoia-fueled evil, which led him to commit many acts of murder, which include the dispatching of his wife and even some of his children. So then Herod the Great charged the Magi to go look for the child and to report back to him afterwards. Then Herod, when he saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, became furious, and he sent and killed all the male children in Bethlehem and in all that region who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had ascertained from the wise men. But after the Magi had found Jesus, they wound up leaving the country by a different way, so as to avoid King Herod and to buy some time to protect Jesus and his family. The book of Matthew then continues. Then was fulfilled what was spoken by the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping and loud lamentation. Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be comforted because they are no more. Matthew 2:16 through 18. And where was King Herod living when the Magi called on him and he ordered the slaughter of the innocents? He was living right here. You can see the remains of his huge palace behind me, here near the old city of Jerusalem. And what a place it was. Roman historian Flavius Josephus was even at a loss for words in describing its magnificence. Here are some of the details. It was built with absolutely zero regard for cost. There were interior rooms with 50-foot high ceilings. sleeping accommodations for literally hundreds of people. There were rooms fully furnished with vessels of silver and gold, courtyards inside the palace with entire groves of trees. And last, there were 3 gigantic towers. From left to right, the Fazael Tower was the tallest. It was 145 feet and named after Herod's brother. The Hippicus Tower was named after a friend of Herod's and was a little shorter at 132 feet high. And last but not least, we have the smallest tower at 75 feet. But it was the most beautiful and ornate tower at the palace. This tower was somewhat awkwardly named after his wife, Mariamne, whom Herod had ordered to be murdered. The opulence and grandeur from which Herod the Great wielded his power was in sharp contrast to the humble conditions surrounding the early life of Jesus. Yet the Gospels contend that King Herod saw fit to try to destroy this potential rival and usurper of his power. Though we have a lot of historical information written from Roman historians outside of the Gospel record, the Massacre of the Innocents event is not one of them. This has led many Gospels critics to speculate whether or not the massacre event ever really happened at all, and that maybe Herod is getting a bum rap, so to speak. But no one really argues whether or not Herod had the ability to do something like this. It was perfectly consistent with the character of what we do know. The attempt to kill baby Jesus by King Herod was one of his last acts as he approached the painful end of his life. Speaking of the death of Herod, King Herod gave orders to be buried in another one of his palaces, this one just down the road from this one. It's called the Herodium. Now, the Herodium was one of his most lavish achievements. He built a planned city with a fortress and a palace for himself in the center. Now, the Herodium is about 7.5 miles south of us and about 3 miles west of Bethlehem. As you approach the ruins of Herod's palace on the Herodium, you'll notice that his man-made mountain has roughly the shape of that volcano that you and your mom made for the science fair. Now today, instead of my sweet Land Rover, I'm driving the SsangYong Rodius to the Herodium. I've got to admit, I've never heard of that model or the company that made it, but it's well built and I like it. The only problem is I find the radio tone control to be completely inscrutable. I can only turn up the bass. If only I was into the local hip-hop. I'm trying, just not getting it. Herod built himself a man-made mountain, and this was no little hill. It became the highest elevation in the Judean wilderness. You see, you could do stuff like that back when you had an almost unlimited supply of money and an army of labor, which of course, he did. The only thing Herod didn't really plan for very well was parking. Herod the Great, underestimator of parking needs. We are here to see the burial site of Herod the Great. Before we do that, let me tell you the story of Herod and the Herodium. Herod became the king of Judea by convincing Caesar Augustus of his loyalty to Rome. To show his loyalty, it is said that he immediately went out and offered incense to the pagan Roman gods. Having convinced Rome that he could be trusted with power, Herod returned to Judea and, with the help of the Roman military, captured Jerusalem. There was a long list of things to do. First, he married Mariamne, his chief rival's daughter. Then he had a number of his rivals murdered. Well, actually, we can't prove that. They all just happened to die, suddenly, under mysterious circumstances. Then Herod built a huge palace to commemorate the military victory. Here is the list of needed specifications. Number 1, he needed it to be seen from anywhere in his kingdom in order to remind people that he was large and in charge. Number 2, he wanted to amaze people with his power. Number 3, he wanted to show Rome that he was a get-her-done kind of guy. Number 4, he wanted his own personal pleasure palace. Number 5, it needed to be defensible because Herod imagined that there was no shortage of people who wanted him dead. And number 6, he needed something to guarantee that he would not be forgotten. And here I am. I'd say mission accomplished, Herod. So let's examine these features. Regarding the height, Herod was a go big or go home kind of guy. He could find no mountain grand enough to suit his requirements. He did, however, locate a place where there were 2 smaller mountains side by side. So he had an army of laborers literally move one mountain and put it on top of the other one. Kind of like this. Yeah, wouldn't it have been nice if Herod could have just done a drag and drop with a mouse and made his big mountain that easily? In actuality, it took millions of shovelfuls of dirt, and they were moved one at a time in the hot sun. It just boggles the mind. But that was the point. Young Herod was demonstrating his power. He had conquered people, and now he wanted to show everyone that he could conquer nature. Now, fortunately, I don't have to lay siege to visit the Herodium. I can just take this nice little path up to the top. Now, the Herodium is 2,600 feet above sea level. But it feels even higher than that, because the palace overlooks the lowest spot on the Earth, the Dead Sea, which you can barely see out there in the distance, which is 1,400 feet below sea level. It's impressive and breathtaking, literally. Herod became the king of Judea by convincing Caesar Augustus of his loyalty to Rome. Many of Herod's subjects hated him and viewed him as a non-Jew and a pretender to the throne. Indeed, he was a vicious man who had sold out Judea to the Romans for his own personal interests. But Herod sought to show Rome that he was no frontier hick. He had grown up there, but he had come to develop a taste for, shall we say, the finer things in life. He could bring the Roman Hellenistic way to Israel, whether they wanted it or not. He'd even out-Roman the Romans, and he'd keep a lid on this volatile place. This palace fortress was incredible. The main structure was round. There was a tower to indicate north, south, east, and west. The tallest tower, about 60 feet in diameter, is on the east and was Herod's personal residence. It was fitted with every possible luxury. Now down here in the main part of the Herodium, what you see are a bunch of large brown rocks. But these walls would have been covered with beautiful frescoes. Now a fresco is when you paint fresh plaster and the paint becomes one with the wall. It's the same technique that Michelangelo used in the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in Rome. Now, since the center part of the courtyard was open, this part here would have been covered in a lush, beautifully manicured garden. And this bathhouse has been discovered. Now, as a child of the desert, water played an important part in all of Herod's palaces. For one, it was a great place to beat the desert heat, and it was a convenient place to drown the occasional annoying in-law. Now, water had to be brought in here at great expense. There were 3 pools and 3 temperatures. Out here was the room for hot, known as the caldarium. Inside here, you can see a small inner room for cold. This was called the frigidarium. And out in this area was the one that was just right, known as the Goldilocks area.
It's tepidarium, Dave.
Yeah, well. Now, Herod had his own unique set of pool rules, in addition to the more traditional ones like no horseplay and no open festering wounds. There was the very unique, don't be an annoying, good-looking brother-in-law whose very existence threatens my power base. No, if you broke that rule, it could earn you what Herod called a big timeout in the deep end. Down at the base of the hill is what was called the Lower Herodium. The grounds consisted of some 38 manicured acres, gigantic storerooms and servant quarters, and a ginormous swimming pool, along with miscellaneous buildings and reception areas. You really need to be here to take in the scale of this place. This fully plastered swimming pool was 10 feet deep, 220 feet long, and 150 feet wide. Incredible. We're talking 2.5 Olympic-sized swimming pools, just shy of an American football field. And it would hold almost 3 million gallons of water in the middle of the desert. And next to the pool was Herod's idea of a little gazebo. It was 1,000 feet long and 100 feet wide. It would fit an army, literally. Roman historian Flavius Josephus tells us that King Herod suffered a long, tormented, and gruesome death. He tells us that he was literally being rotted away from the inside out, and, unsurprisingly, had begun growing increasingly crazy and ill-tempered as a result of the disease state progressing. As a for instance, Josephus tells us that King Herod made his own funeral plans, which included the usual pomp and pageantry. Gold crown? Check. Royal purple robe? Check. Scepter in right hand? Check. 500 escorts in a 25-mile procession? Check. Military escort with full battle gear? Check. Burial in a location fit for a megalomaniac? Check. Oh, and murder prominent citizens after I die so that a lot of people will cry and other people will see them and think they're crying over me. Check. The Herodium was but one of Herod's palaces, but this is the place he chose to be buried. For many years, the location of his tomb was a mystery, but in 2007, Ehud Netzer of Hebrew University announced that he had found it here. The tomb had been completely vandalized. This sarcophagus was found in the tomb and is on display at the Israel Museum. Most, but not all, believe it to be Herod's. Ironically, the main argument to dispute this conclusion is that the tomb is not grand enough. But the counter-argument is that the whole complex was one big monument to the man. But just as Herod was exiting stage left for his date with eternity, a new king of the Jews was entering the scene. And at this point in the gospel story, Jesus' parents, because of King Herod, were on the run for their lives. Now when they had departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Rise, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you. For Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him." And he rose and took the child and his mother by night and departed to Egypt and remained there until the death of Herod. Like Judea, Egypt was part of the Roman Empire at that time, but it was beyond Herod's rule and control. Egypt was an imperial province ruled by Augustus, the Roman emperor himself. Jesus and his family likely lived among a Jewish community in Egypt and would have enjoyed a degree of anonymity and separation from Hellenistic culture. Then, Herod the Great finally died around March of 4 BC. The Gospels then describe a visitation to Joseph. After Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who were trying to take the child's life are dead." So he got up, took the child and his mother, and went to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning in Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. Having been warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee, and he went and lived in a town called Nazareth.
so was fulfilled what was said through the prophets, that he would be called a Nazarene. This is where Jesus was raised. Today, Nazareth is known as the Arab capital of Israel. Its population of 200,000 is predominantly Arab. About 30% are Christians, and about 70% are Muslims. But when Jesus was growing up here, it was a wide spot in the road. Situated near the much larger Roman metropolitan centers of Tiberias and Sepphoris, Nazareth was a small Jewish enclave with a population of only a few hundred people. Not much is written in the Gospels about Jesus' childhood, but we can assume that since Jesus was a Jewish boy, receiving an education would have been a very high priority. He would have been taught Hebrew at a synagogue, very much like this beautifully and authentically crafted reproduction here at Nazareth Village. Every year, Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem for the festival of the Passover. When he was 12 years old, they went up to the festival according to the custom. Now, the Passover feast occurred every spring to celebrate the miraculous events described in the Old Testament book of Exodus. When I see the blood, I will pass over you, and the plague shall not be upon you to destroy you, when I smite the land of Egypt. Exodus chapter 12, verse 13. It was this event, some 1,400 years earlier, that eventually brought the Hebrew people to this land. You know, making the journey from Nazareth to Jerusalem every year for the Passover feast was a pretty big deal for Jesus' family. They couldn't just hop on the Yitzhak Rabin Expressway and be there in a few hours. No, they had to walk. And it was 100 miles. Have you ever walked 100 miles? Have you ever complained about the fact that you couldn't find a parking place at Bubba Bob's Texas Barbecue on all-you-can-eat brisket night? Me neither. The first Passover in an Israelite temple goes back to the first temple, completed in about 960 BC. King David chose the location, but it was his son Solomon who ordered it to be built. The Old Testament records that Solomon's temple was an incredible achievement, built through the labors of some 180,000 workers, artists, and craftsmen. However, not long after its completion, the temple suffered a series of assaults. Its treasures were plundered over the years by the Egyptians and Assyrians. Then, in 587 BC, the temple was totally destroyed by the Babylonians. About 70 years later, after the Babylonians were defeated by the Persians, Cyrus the Great of Persia allowed the Hebrew people to return home to rebuild the Great Temple in Jerusalem. This temple was appropriately known as the Second Temple. Then Alexander the Great conquered Judea in 332 BC. After his death, Jerusalem and the Second Temple became part of the Ptolemaic Kingdom of Egypt. Then, in about 200 BC, Judea came under the authority of the Seleucid Empire of Syria. In 167 BC, Antiochus IV of Syria committed the ultimate offense against the Jewish people when he erected an altar to Zeus and slaughtered pigs there to defile the place. The Second Temple was looted and its religious services stopped. A Judean rebel group called the Maccabees rose up against the Seleucid Empire to reclaim the honor of Judaism. The revolt was a series of battles over 7 years, where the outnumbered Maccabees became known for their guerrilla warfare tactics. In 164 BC, the Maccabees finally reclaimed Jerusalem and ritually cleansed the temple. The temple again became the religious pillar of the Israelites. This 103-year time period of relative independence is known as the Hasmonean dynasty, a period which ended in 63 BC at the Roman conquest of Jerusalem under Pompey the Great. Judea was turned into a client state kingdom of the Roman Empire, which began the collaboration between the Romans and Herod the Great. In around 20 BC, Herod the Great began a massive rebuild of the temple in order to make it bigger and better. Herod's temple in Jerusalem during the spectacle of the Passover feast must have been quite an experience for a 12-year-old boy from the small town of Nazareth. And when the feast was ended, as they were returning, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. His parents did not know it, but supposing him to be in the group, they went a day's journey. But then they began to search for him among their relatives and acquaintances. And when they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem searching for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. And when his parents saw him, they were astonished. And his mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us so? Behold, your father and I have been searching for you in great distress." And he said to them, "Why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I must be in my father's house?" And they did not understand the saying that he spoke to them. And he went down with them and came to Nazareth, and was submissive to them. And his mother treasured up all these things in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. It seems Jesus had a normal childhood in Nazareth. But at the age of 12, Jesus started to show a new side. According to the Gospels, he had extraordinary insights beyond his years. He earned special respect from his elders in the Jewish temple. Undoubtedly, it was a bit different in the Herodian palaces throughout Judea. By contrast, King Herod's sons were raised in royal splendor, royal privilege. They were feared merely because of their position and power. Although early in Jesus' life, it seems a clash of kingdoms was already brewing.